Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 267, The Showman, Part 4. On the 4th of January 1912 in the Lismore Northern Star, Kemp's buck jumping show. Last night the public of Lismore were entertained to perhaps the finest quality of buck-jumper riding and handling of unbroken horses that was ever witnessed on the northern rivers. After the usual preliminaries and preparations, the professor mounted the outlaw well prepared for any trouble that might arise. The horse bucked with an evident intention of getting rid of his encumbrance, but he failed, and amid loud applause from the large crowd, the professor rode the horse to a standstill and then dismounted. The effort was a severe one, for a few minutes after dismounting, the professor was attacked with a fit of sickness. Within the ring, the first performance was to catch and handle a number of unbroken horses belonging to Mr. C. Balsa. Mr. Kemp's lassoing was perfect, and he never failed to rope his horse at the first attempt. He selected a 6-year-old mare, which Mr. Balsa publicly stated had never been caught or handled. Taking the rope off, in a few minutes the professor had the mare by the ears, working her around. Then, without a saddle or bridle, he rode for several times around the ring, but the mare made no attempt to buck. While on her back, he obtained a saddle and laid it on the animal's neck and gradually worked it back into the proper position, fastening the girths and the surcingle himself, and then rode around the arena. He then let go all of the tackle, working the saddle out along the mare's neck, and the saddle and rider slid over the mare's head to the ground, and the professor explained that this method was the safest one to adopt getting off a horse in order to avoid being kicked. His remarkable performance was loudly applauded. Professor Kemp believes that no horse need be a buck jumper, and he publicly stated his method was the most humane in which to break in horses. All that was required was for people to know how to exercise it, and then savage methods in common use would disappear. The show was a good one of its kind, and tonight the professor will introduce some new features. Prior to the performance this evening, Miss Kemp and a local celebrity will have a high jumping competition in the paddock outside the enclosure, the exhibition being free. I did find a marriage record for a John J.P. Daly and Mary Howard, who married in Tamworth in 1912. And this is the closest I can get to the initials of his birth name, and knowing that there has been reference to Mary Daly and that they were up in New South Wales around this time. On the 5th of January 1912, they were at Woodburn in New South Wales, and we know that because it mentions that J. Daly, alias Professor Kemp, was in court and he was fined £1 for riotous behaviour. On the 11th of March 1912 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, it refers to the casino case and the mistreatment of the bull. And it says in a district court yesterday, John P. Daly, alias Professor Kemp, buck-jumping show proprietor, appealed against his conviction at the police court from the 29th of November case on a charge of cruelly ill-treating a steer during a public exhibition. The judge upheld the appeal and quashed the conviction, but he disallowed costs. By the 10th of August 1912, they're up at Toowoomba, Queensland. And again, he's facing court. John Patrick Daly, Professor Kemp, was caught with horse stealing. Constable Thomas Old of the Criminal Investigation Department said he knew John Patrick Daly, alias Professor Kemp. He's a horse breaker and runs a buck-jumping show. He saw him yesterday at 5 p.m. at the town hall. There were horses in the yard and I spoke to him. I said to the attendant, "Are all these horses your property?" And he replied, "Yes, but they're not all paid for." "Did you have a weigh bill with the stock inspector today?" He replied, "Yes." I showed him a weigh bill and he looked at it and he said, "That is the one." I said to the defendant, "I want you to point out to me all of the horses described in the weigh bill." He did so, with the exception of 2, which were in the yard. Among the horses was a piebald filly. I said to the defendant, "Catch that piebald filly," and he did so. I said to him, "What brands are on that filly?" He replied, "CB near the shoulder. It is Chusty Balsa's brand. He has a cordial factory at Lismore." I examined the filly and I saw the brand was indistinct. The brand was clipped and showed a C or a G, a horizontal bar over B on the near shoulder, also 50 on the near ribs under the saddle.
I said to the defendant, "Where did you get this filly?" And he replied, "Bolsa bought this filly to the show at Lismore. Miss Kemp rode her. Bolsa said he could take her along, and if she did not suit, we could return her when we came back, and if she suited us, we could pay for her." But there was no price mentioned. I said to the defendant, "I have a warrant for your arrest, charging you with stealing this filly, together with 2 chestnut geldings." I then read to him the warrant, which I now produce, and he replied, "I left the 2 chestnut geldings in Percy Arnold's paddock at Toogoolawah. I am to give Bolsa £14 for them. I have already told you how I got the filly." I said to him, "Do you admit or deny that you are John Patrick Daly, alias Professor Kemp, mentioned in this warrant?" He replied, "I am the man." I then arrested him. Inspector Toohey asked for a remand for 8 days, which was granted. The defendant asked the bench if he could have his liberty until Monday. He'd advertised his show and he wanted to carry it out tonight or tomorrow. He put a lot of expense in the advertisement, and wet weather had interfered with him greatly. Now the fine weather was on, he had a chance of making a little money, and if he was allowed to go on with his show, it would give him a chance of paying his way. He would also allow himself to be placed under police supervision, if the bench wished. He had been put to the expense of laying on electric lights to his yards, as well as building the yards for his show. These horses were lent to him, and he had them for 6 months. In reply to the bench, Inspector Toohey said it was a New South Wales case. He knew nothing about it. The defendant was charged with stealing 3 horses. 1 had been recovered. He would submit by telegram defendant's application for bail. Knowing the defendant was a very prominent character, he asked if his arrest was desirable, and they replied it was very desirable. The defendant said the other 2 horses were in a paddock at Toogoolawah. The police there could find that out. They were left there as they were too poor to travel with the show. The police magistrate said, "I don't want to ruin the man if I can help it. If he's advertised his show, I'd like to give him a chance." The defendant said he'd advertised his show. His wife was in the hospital with a broken leg. All he wanted was to pay his way, and then he would hand himself over to the police. The police magistrate said the inspector would communicate with the New South Wales Police and see if they could do anything for him. If he could see his way clear to grant bail, he would do so at a later stage during the day. So he was remanded until the 27th of August, and bail was allowed for self in £25 and a surety of £25. Then in the Richmond River Express and Casino Kyogle Advertiser on the 3rd of September 1912, Professor Kemp's troubles. A good deal of time at the Lismore court one day last week was absorbed in hearing the charge against Patrick Daly, alias Professor Kemp, of stealing 3 horses, the property of Christian Bolsa of Lismore. The police magistrate considered this was not a case to go to a jury, pointing out that unless the defendant's business had taken him away, he would not have him arrested, and he would discharge the accused. On the 23rd of September 1913 in the Bowen Independent, Professor Kemp the Great Horseman has been fined £5 and £1 1 costs at Tandale for common assault. On the 15th of October 1914 in the Shepparton News in Victoria, dispute over high jump, a wild scene at Germantown Show. An exciting disturbance occurred when the high jump was in progress at the Germantown Show. There were 3 competing horses, S.A. Kelly's Miss Yeoman, and 2 horses entered by Professor Kemp of buck-jumping fame. The 3 horses had their turn and cleared the barrier, and Kemp was asked by the judge to jump the horse according to showground regulations. Kemp made a retort audible to patrons of the grandstand, which the judge regarded as abusive, and he disqualified both of Kemp's horses. Kemp and his daughter vehemently protested, and a large section of the public having manifested support for Kemp, he rode before the crowd fence crying out, "Gentlemen, if they don't let me jump, I will claim first prize." The judge was supported in his act by various officials, and Kemp, on finding this out, said and repeated, "Gentlemen, they're trying to annoy me. They think I will lose my nut, but they will be mistaken." Kemp took his horses out of the ring and announced before the whole crowd that he would jump his horses a foot higher than the horse that got the blue ribbon in his own show ring on the showgrounds. The crowd filtered into Kemp's ring, and Kemp did a profitable business. After several buck-jumping exhibitions, Kemp addressed the audience. He had not concluded when the police started to cut down the tent sides. In another instance, Senior Constable Barth and another constable had Kemp under arrest. A large crowd surged around, loudly hooting and boo-hooing the police, and a general melee seemed imminent. But the police forced their way through the crowd quickly. Kemp then stopped and appealed to the crowd to keep quiet. These are good men, meaning the constables who had him under arrest, and he said, and they will see that I will get a square deal in the police court. We can't blame them. Some of the crowd still continued to hoot, and these were cautioned by plainclothes police to desist. Kemp was now allowed to put his coat on, hand over his money, and give instructions about the buck jumping show to Miss Kemp. Then the police partly proceeded, with Miss Kemp following behind a little way and sobbing bitterly, whilst people were heard to call out, "Shame, shame." It was an unlucky day for Kemp, as he'd been fined £3 the same morning at the police court on charges of having used insulting language to Constable Macaulay of Henty and of having assaulted Constable Macaulay. Senior Constable Bath informed a representative of the Border Morning Mail that the police were powerless to act unless they had received instructions from the committee. The police had cut the tent sides and arrested Kemp, John Daly, under the instructions from the committee. So by February 1915, they're at Moruya in New South Wales. And interestingly, by February 1915 in the Moruya Times, Miss Kemp is featured, not with Kemp's buck jumping circus. Miss Kemp and Signor Raphael's Oriental Circus and buck jumping combination, attractive additions, 25-star artists, 45 horses, donkeys and mules, large marquee and corral tents, seating to accommodate 1,000 patrons. And it says on Monday evening, Miss Kemp and Raphael's circus and buck jumping show opened to a good house. The circus included some novel and clever turns. A couple of bucking cows produced amusement, while amongst the horses a substantial reward was offered to any rider who could sit ding-dong. This horse is a marvel and can do anything within reason, including telling the time by a watch, adding up figures and dividing the total by a small number. Sounds very much like Chester, don't you think? On the 1st of October 1915 in the Gosford Times and Wyong District Advocate, cruelty at a Wild West show. Mary Daly, proprietress of Miss Kemp's Wild West show, pled guilty at the North Sydney Police Court last week to a charge of causing a cow to be cruelly ill-treated at an exhibition. Inspector Fullerton stated at the show that the cow was brought in with a long rope around its horns. The animal was lashed to a post and the defender put a saddle on the cow's back, girthing it very tightly. A crupper was put on and pulled very tight. A man wearing spurs got on the cow's back. It was liberated and commenced to buck and bolt around the ring with the rider spurring it, causing the animal to bellow loudly. A cattle dog at the same time worried the cow's heels and bit it several times ferociously. A man in the ring belted the cow over the head with a bag. The animal seemed to be in great pain and attacked the man using the bag, knocking him down and gored him so badly he had to be removed to the hospital. The cow, when seen the next day, appeared to be very sore. Mary Daly received a fine of £5 and 6 shillings costs with an alternative of 2 months' hard labour. So Mary's out on her own. So why is she out on her own and there's no mention of her husband? There's nothing for 8 months. On the 3rd of June 1916 in the Nepean Times in Penrith, recent fracas at St Mary's. At the Penrith Police Court on Tuesday, Mary Daly, known professionally as Miss Kemp, was charged with having inflicted grievous bodily harm on Alfred Walker at St Mary's on the 10th of May. The case arose out of recent disorderly proceedings which occurred at Kemp's buck jumping show at St Mary's, where Frederick Young was charged with shooting with intent to wound Alfred Walker on the same occasion. The defendant is the wife of John Daly, proprietor of the buck jumping show, and apparently takes at times an active part in the program. During the melee on the evening stated, it was alleged that the defendant struck Alfred Walker with the handle of a whip, whilst Kemp, John Daly and Les Adams were struggling on the ground, and Walker taking a hand in trying to pull Kemp off Adams. Defendant apparently acted on the impulse of the moment on behalf of her husband, and later it's alleged she struck at Walker with a table knife, inflicting, it is said, a flesh wound. Dr. Day's evidence showed that the wound inflicted on Walker with the knife was superficial, it had not broken inner skin, and it would not incapacitate the complainant following his usual occupation. And Mr. Baker asked, based on the medical opinion, that the bench might see fit to reduce the charge to common assault. The magistrate, after consulting law authorities, said that he did decide to reduce the charge to one of simple assault, and on being charged with this assault, the defendant pled guilty. The defendant made a statement, not sworn, in which she stated that thinking her husband was in danger, she entered the ring and on being kicked, she struck at Walker with a whip in self-defence. She denied picking up the knife. She said that the boys before the show started expressing their intention of mucking up the performance in the vicinity of the hotel. Constable Walsh of St Mary's remarked that if anyone spoke of mucking up the show, it could not have been Elf Walker or Les or Dick Adams, as they'd only returned shortly after the starting hour from their work. They'd gone home for dinner and came there direct to the show. Sergeant Ryan referred to other rumpuses of the kind in which Kemp had figured and said it was more fortunate for the defendant that more serious consequences had not ensued. The magistrate imposed a fine of £5 on the defendant for the assault and allotted the sum of £4.15 as 6 witnesses' expenses. 1 month's time was given for the payment of the total amount of £9.15. Sergeant Ryan remarked humanely that seeing the defendant was a woman with a family and a child in arms, he would rather pay the fine himself than see her committed to prison, a sentiment which does the worthy sergeant infinite credit. So they clearly have a family together, and now it's stating in June 1916 that she has an infant. So frustratingly, because of his numerous aliases, it's very difficult to find the formal records attached to whatever alias is chosen at the time to use to add onto the birth certificates. In September 1916, they're still in Sydney, and it says that Kemp's buck jumping show, located in Parramatta Road, continues to attract and delight crowded audiences every night. The show is full of daring deeds, skillful riding and humorous horsey acts, in addition to the mystery horse Chester, whose almost human intelligence puzzles and pleases patrons. With that wonderful horsewoman Miss Kemp at the head of the show, she is exceedingly clever and attractive. And then in the Sydney Evening News on the same day, it says the continued success of Kemp's buck jumping show necessitates a change of location. For the remainder of the season, some interesting programs will be presented. A new feature of the show is the engagement of Mrs Stace, the idol of every show ring in Australia, who will give exhibitions of high jumping tonight. And on the 8th of October 1916, in the Sydney Sunday Times, a good assortment of a hilarious equine fun was provided at Kemp's buck jumping show at Worth's new hippodrome last night. It featured a soldiers' rough riding contest. Soldiers came in from surrounding camps. There were also exciting items on the program, including fine exhibitions of stock whip cracking and lariat throwing by Miss Kemp, and the clever talking horse Chester showed his conversational talents under the direction of the same lady. On the 27th of October 1916, in the Sydney Stock and Station Journal, Kemp's buck jumping show. Professor Kemp is a wonderful man among horses where outlaws are concerned. He'll go into the arena with an unbroken colt, and without a bridle or saddle within 5 minutes will be astride him. The audience is simply spellbound, never having seen anybody perform such a feat. Miss Kemp, a stock whip cracker, has no equal. When she brings her educated horse Chester into the ring to perform, you could hear a pin drop. So intent are her listeners to try and fathom her problem. Chester will tell the time on 3 different watches, and afterwards the difference between them. The day of the week, the month of the year, what year the war started, and naturally when it will finish. He adds up a sum of 4 figures and divides any number you like to give into the original sum. Chester is simply marvellous. Jimmy Kemp, the boy wonder, is always worth looking at, on one of the rough ones or over the big jumps. Mrs Stace, the idol of Australian horsewomen, gives a fine exhibition of high jumping with her horse Willaroo. The show is tip-top and well worthy of patronage. Then on the 2nd of March 1917, they're at Newcastle Showground. It says included in the show is Miss Kemp, the world's greatest horsewoman. There are bucking ponies for the boys and numerous other attractions. Then by the 31st of August 1917, they're back down in Victoria at Chiltern. Our readers, especially those who have good horses, will be pleased to learn that at Barnawartha on Saturday evening, they'll have an opportunity of witnessing a display of horsemanship by Professor Kemp, Jack Daly and his staff. The professor is well known throughout Australia and brings along with him a string of jumpers which secured all the high jumping prizes at the shows recently in New South Wales, and buck jumpers and riders. The professor will be pleased if unbroken horses are brought in to prove his right to the big reputation he's attained as a horseman throughout Australia. On the following Saturday, the show will give a performance at Luna Park in Chiltern. And on the 14th of September 1917, Professor Kemp, Jack Daly, the noted buck jumping rider, is again in the northeast. At present he's at Wangaratta, where he's drawing crowded houses to see his show during the past week or so. He will soon pay a visit to Benalla. On the 13th of October 1917, there were advertisements far and wide, and it says the experience of Miss Kemp, the world's greatest horsewoman, was afraid of her own shadow and now delights in riding equine outlaws. A remarkable case of a woman's transformation from a bundle of nerves to a human packet of indomitable courage and endurance is that of Miss Kemp, the famous lady rider of buck jumpers and hurdles. And in the advertisement, she wrote a personal letter to the chemist telling him of the wonderful results that she's derived from Heinz tonic nerve nuts. Some 7 months ago, I was in such a nervous condition that I dreaded being in contact with the average horse. I would have palpitations of the heart and tremor with my hands. Because of the great good Professor Kemp had derived from Heinz essence, when he suffered from pneumonia, I decided to try Heinz tonic nerve nuts. I was delighted with the results. On the 28th of December 1917, they're up in Orange, New South Wales, where it says that Professor and Miss Kemp have made a specialty in buck jump riding and have had a successful season in Sydney and will now show in Western towns and will appear for one night only at Millthorpe on Saturday. They have the best team of buck jumpers ever seen in Australia, including Chester, the equine wonder. A book which every horseman should possess will be on sale at the entertainment. The show will be given in Orange during the racing season next week. And in the Orange Leader on the 18th of January 1918, on Wednesday night last, Professor Kemp and his buck jumping show paid a return visit to Millthorpe where they were well received. During the visit, Professor Kemp earned a splendid reputation for his horse mastery. He challenged anyone in the district to bring an outlawed horse in and he would catch and tame them in the ring. If he failed to do it, he would forfeit all of his door takings. 3 horses were brought in and the worst one he caught without trouble, putting the saddle and bridle on him and rode him around the ring, afterwards taking the saddle and bridle off whilst on its back. The next day he rode the horse to Blaney. Men who witnessed Professor Kemp at work and have been at work amongst horses all their lives say that it seems nothing short of a miracle to them and are convinced that he can do as he states with any horse. Professor Kemp says he'll return to Millthorpe again and give an entertainment in buck jumping for a patriotic benefit. They left for Blaney on Thursday. And on the 26th of January 1918, they were in Bathurst. It features Kemp's buck jumpers and the famous Miss Kemp with her educated horse Chester and toy ponies also, a fine team of professional riders. Professor Kemp in his clever colt manipulation. On the 6th of February 1918, they're up at Wallawang near Lithgow and they do 2 nights there and then they go on to Portland, New South Wales for 2 nights. And then it said the show will be back in Lithgow on Monday night for another performance. There was a small report on his show at Lithgow saying Mr. Kemp and his assistants came here with glowing reports from other centres and they realised expectations. The little pony Tipperary proved almost too elusive for the local lads, who stepped into the ring to capture it and ride it. A couple, however, stuck on for a few seconds and then hit the ground suddenly. The buck jumping was thoroughly genuine and of high class. Then on the 31st of March 1918, they're back in Sydney for the show. Kemp's buck jumpers at the show is exciting and instructive. The pick of Australia's horsemen will compete for big purses, big prizes and gold medals daily. Professor Kemp and his daughter, Miss Kemp, will appear at each performance. 3 2,000 candle power electric lights have been hung and 600 candle power lamps at the entrances. The Governor of New South Wales has signified his intention of being present at one of the performances during the season. Then on the 20th of December 1918, up in Orange again, it is advertised as Miss Kemp's Show. Ever since the last visit of Kemp's buck jumping show, the public have been looking forward to their return, and now this treat is announced to take place on Saturday night and continue through to Christmas. The show this time is under the capable management of Miss Kemp. Miss Kemp promises patrons a feast of buck jumping. 2 exhibitions have been arranged with our local rider Leslie Marriott on 2 well-known local outlaws. So why do we now have Mary Kemp running her own show? Well, John Patrick Daly died at the Yarrabend Asylum on the 17th of March 1919, his cause of death being colitis. So it's quite likely that he was committed to the mental asylum between March and December 1918. The coroner's inquest says that the deceased, Patrick Daly, aged 45, was received at the institution on the 5th of July 1900 on the order produced. So interesting, I did find another record saying that he did go to Victoria to an asylum. However, other records say that he went to Kenmore, which is near Goulburn, before he escaped. It then says he was a case of recurrent insanity but was in fair health. For years past, he's had a case of secondary dementia. Since being readmitted, he suffered from diarrhoea, to which he gradually became weaker and died at 1:30 p.m. on the 17th. He was visited by friends who were informed of his death. And there are extra notes saying that he was visited by his cousin and he had an official visitor as well in March 1919. So that could very well account for his aggressive outbursts. It didn't seem he had control of what he was doing once he got into a rage. So just to track Mary, as we know, John died on the 17th of March. She's up at Grenfell in New South Wales on the 7th of February 1919, so about a month before his death. Kemp's buck jumpers made their appearance in Grenfell to a good house on Wednesday night. Miss Kemp's outlaws came with a big reputation. There's also Tipperary, the trick-bucking pony for the boys who caused much amusement. The old equine wonder Chester, who counts and adds up with almost human instinct, was absolutely the most marvellous horse yet seen here and is alone worth the money. A good clean hour of fun for £1 plus tax. The whole show is very ably conducted by Miss Kemp and assisted by 3 splendid riders, one a returned Anzac, and it may be summed up in one word, dinkum. Then in the December of 1919, after John's death in the March, they're in Maitland, New South Wales. Miss Kemp's buck jumping show will open tonight at the rear of the Carrington Hotel. There are 30 clever buck jumpers to be seen in the ring, including horses from all parts of Australia. Wollombi, a little dark bay horse, is said to be the cleverest horse that has ever travelled. An account of the show on the 20th of December 1919, Miss Kemp's buck jumping show. Miss Kemp's buck jumping show attracted a large audience last night and was a thoroughly enjoyable program. In her team are 37 horses. Although quiet enough when being prepared and mounted, they become demons when they are given the word go. So that last night a series of busters were witnessed and many promising local riders met their Waterloo. While the children's delight was Tipperary, an extremely small pony that, although in no way savage, absolutely refuses to be caught, much less saddled. So tricky is he that although a large number of children were in the ring at the one time, he escaped them all. He's responsible for much amusement and in fact was one of the star turns. The mules were another attraction. Miss Kemp was loudly applauded for her exhibition of stock whip cracking. She uses a whip 10 foot long and her performances included the 2-hand crack, the Queensland flash and many others. Besides this, she cuts a cigarette from the mouth of an assistant and gives exhibitions of paper cutting. She also rode Mountain Blue to a standstill and her exhibition left nothing to be desired. And on the 19th of January 1920 they're in Newcastle. Tonight at Broadmeadow near the Picture Show, Miss Kemp's Great Buck Jumping Show, the Horse Show of Australia and the Talk of Australia-Asia will be presented to the Newcastle public. A string of buck jumpers from all parts of Australia, including Chester the human horse and Tipperary the children's pet, as well as bucking mules. On the 13th of February 1920, they're at Hamilton near Newcastle. And on the 30th of March 1920, they're advertised in the Dugog Chronicle, Durham and Gloucester Advertiser. Miss Kemp's buck jumping show was a chief attraction at the show. Then they're advertised in Kempsey on the 28th of May 1920 with 20 buck jumpers, with show boys and educated horses as a fine part of the program. A thrilling performance throughout, a big cheering audience attended last night. Then on the 1st of October 1920, they're at Elsmore near Inverell. Mary married Job Stone in Brisbane on the 9th of August 1921. She was 33 and Job was 42. He had divorced Clara Susanna Wigg a month before their marriage. On the 9th of August 1921 in the paper, it states that in this case, Job Stone, a house and land agent, requested a rule absolute in connection with a rule nisi that he'd filed back on the 10th of December 1919 for the dissolution of his marriage with Clara Susanna Stone, formerly Wigg, and William Shipp, railway labourer, being joined as co-defendant. There was no appearance by the defendant or co-defendant, and a rule absolute was granted. Job and Clara had 2 children, Athol and Lillian. They went to live with their mother when she left Job in 1902, but her health prevented her from taking care of them and they were returned to their father. However, in August 1903, Job was taken to court, charged with neglecting the children. Athol was then 5 and Lillian 3. In evidence, it was stated that the father, Job Stone, was in the habit of frequenting the streets with reputed prostitutes, and one was living in the home with him in Bank Street, South Brisbane, and 2 prostitutes at the house in Torwood. He also said the children were frequently left alone in the house for hours at a time. Constable Dargan, the inspector under the Act, said he'd known the two children for 6 months, first in Bank Street, West End, and then in Payne Street, Torwood. They were living with a father and a prostitute named Florrie Wilson. On the 21st of August, he went to Payne Street at 10 a.m. and saw the father, Job Stone. He asked how many girls he had living there and was told only Florrie Wilson. Dargan wanted to see her, and she came out to him in a half-naked condition, with in fact only her skirt on. He asked her where the young woman was, who he had been with in George Street the night before, and she said she was in the house and called her out, and in response a woman came, Rosie Smith, who was also a prostitute, also in a semi-nude condition. There was also a man there named William Shaw, whom he knew to be an associate of prostitutes. The children were also in a half-dressed state and sitting on a box. Dargan said it was the dirtiest home he had ever seen. As a result of this court case, the children were taken in by their grandmother, Job's mother, and Job was required to pay maintenance. As the children got older, they must have had a much better relationship with their father. Lillian, who was known as Lilia, had married and she died on the 20th of July 1921. Her memorial was announced in the Brisbane Telegraph on the 20th of June 1922, who stated she was accidentally killed, and this was a memorial placed by her father and stepmother, Mary. So it says inserted by her loving father and stepmother, J. and M. Stone. Mary, with her new husband, continued with the Kemp's buck jumping show. On the 24th of December 1926, they were in Lismore at Howes Paddock. In the Kyogle Examiner on the 16th of November 1928, Miss Kemp's buck jumping show opened season tonight with 20 head buck jumpers. They're then in Queensland on the 30th of January 1929 at Boona. Miss Kemp's buck jumpers. At Iserberg's Hippodrome last Saturday, there was a daring exhibition of riding by Miss Kemp's buck jumpers. There was a challenge contest between Miss Kemp and Evans's Outlaw. Evans sent in a buck jumper, which was for sale for £2, and the conditions were that if he threw Miss Kemp, the sum of £4 was to be paid. However, Miss Kemp gave a very good exhibition and won the contest. The show consists of 26 horses and has its headquarters here and will visit various centres. They thank the local people for their liberal patronage. On the 8th of November 1929, they were at Southport in Queensland at the showgrounds. And then on the 21st of March 1930, we're up in Ipswich. Miss Kemp's buck jumping show was here on Monday and Tuesday and attracted big crowds. In the Brisbane Telegraph on the 23rd of August 1939, it announced the death of Job Stone. The late Mr. Job Stone, a well-known horseman. Mr. Job Stone died suddenly on the weekend. From boyhood he was associated with horses and for some years had charge of the stables for the late Mr. Ernest Baines. With Ernest Baines, he won the first water jump in Brisbane and maintained his interest in horses to the end. For some years, in association with his wife, who was Miss M.A. Kemp, a well-known horsewoman, he trained horses for shows, and when his health prevented him continuing this work, he and Mrs. Stone opened a riding school at Corporoo, which they'd been carrying on ever since. The late Mr. Stone was at the exhibition last Friday afternoon and saw a high jump championship event there. He was not very well at the time, but on Friday evening his interest in boxing kept him up listening to the radio description of the big fight. Even on Saturday morning he had to go out into the yard and have a look at one of his horses. He died on Saturday night. The late Mr. Stone in his younger days was a popular dancer and won many prizes at the Old Trades Hall in solo items and with a sister. Besides Mrs. Stone, there survives their only son, Athol, who lives in Brisbane, and 2 adopted daughters. On the 19th of August 1940 in the Brisbane Telegraph, there's a memorial for Job that was placed by Mary Stone. In loving remembrance of my dear husband and our father, Job Stone, who passed away on the 19th of August 1939. Inserted by his loving wife and children, M.A. Stone, Miss Kemp, Zena, Les, Dawn, Kay, Jack and Pat. So I was able to glean some information and make some links there, but not all of the children I can account for. One of them, though, listed as Dawn, was actually Joan Elizabeth Stone, And on the 6th of May 1946, in the Brisbane Telegraph, her engagement is announced, and it says that she's the second daughter of Mrs. J. Stone and the late Mr. Stone of Corporoo, who was engaged to Chief Cook Challis Knights, RN, only son of Mr. and Mrs. Knights of Leicester, England. A further article on the 11th of August 1947 in the Brisbane Telegraph, sailor novice rides jumpers. Never in the saddle until 6 months ago, an ex-Royal Navy lad today helped to thrill the show crowd when he put 2 high jumpers through their paces. He was Charlie Knight, 21, who was discharged in Australia so that he could marry Miss Dawn Stone of Corporoo. Charlie said they'd be married on the 6th of September. During the war, Miss M. Kemp, who runs a riding school at Corporoo, catered for sailors at the riding school. A cook, a friend of Charlie's, tried for 3 weeks before they could talk Charlie into mounting a horse. It is a family concern, for Miss Kemp is only the business name of the lady whose daughter Charlie is marrying, and they were her horses that Charlie was putting through the high jumps today. His bride-to-be is a noted horsewoman. He learnt to ride at Miss Kemp's riding school while he was stationed at Rockley. He's a pretty versatile kind of chap because he not only learnt horsemanship, but he won the heart of Miss Dawn Stone, the daughter of Miss Kemp, who in private life is Mrs. Stone. Yesterday he rode in the high jump and shared 3rd place on Miss Kemp's carina. He won prizes in the hunts and also obtained a special mention. While the ambulance was plastering face with striking plaster after a nasty fall in the high jump, Charlie said he was born in Norwich. We got bombed out of there and Mum and I shifted to Leicester. Then I became old enough to join the Navy and I was posted to a landing craft and sent to Australia. I'd only seen horses now and then in England, but I always swore that I'd own and ride one before I died. I got the chance in Australia when I was at Rockley. I went to a riding school and well, here I am. Miss Kemp said Charlie is a born horseman and what's more, he's got what it takes. There's only one good word for it, guts. He loves horses and they love him. I am happy and proud that he will soon marry my daughter. They married on the 6th of September 1947. In 1950, when he broke the Mount Gravatt show high jump record on one of Mary Kemp's horses, at 25 and living at Stanley Road, Camp Hill, the officials described him as absolutely fearless and he rode through inches of mud to break the record. And it stated that during the war he served in more than a dozen ships in British waters and the Pacific and is now a builder. And interestingly, only a few months after her husband's death, there is a notice in a Rockhampton paper on the 28th of December 1939, statutory notice to next of kin. Philip Henry Gould, late of Wandoo Street in Fortitude Valley, Brisbane, Storman and Packer. Notice is hereby given that Mary or Anne Gould, believed to have been known as Polly Gould, the lawful daughter of Philip Gould and Dinah Gould, née Cook, that all persons claiming through her by will or other derivative title, howsoever, are required to forward proof of her or their relationship to Philip Henry Gould, or proof of her or their right to participate in the distribution of his estate before June 1940. Otherwise, after the expiration of this date, the public curator will proceed to distribute assets to the parties titled thereto, having regard only to the claims of which they have had notice. I found a reason for why Mary Ann Gould did not maintain contact with her parents for a long time. On the 2nd of March 1891 in the Brisbane Evening Observer, it says a little girl of 13 years of age named Mary Ann Gould, who's been absent from her home since the 22nd of February, was handed over to the custody of the police on Friday. She had been in the company of larrikins about Jubilee and Arthur Terraces. She was brought up at the City Police Court on Saturday, where her father and mother were present. Mr. Pinnock advised the father to send her to an industrial home, but he declined and said he'd rather see her go to the Salvation Army Rescue Home. Mr. Pinnock said the probability was that she will escape from there and join the ranks of the unfortunates in Brisbane. He could only send her there as an industrial school child. The parents would not agree. Mr. Pinnock said, "If you see your daughter a prostitute about the streets, do not blame me. I want to send her to the industrial home for 5 years. She would then be 18 and in a position to take care of herself. You are an unnatural father." On the 24th of July 1949 in the Brisbane Sunday Mail, greying, wiry 66-year-old May Kemp of Stanley Road, Camp Hill, wants to die with her spurs on. She boasts she's the oldest woman rider now competing in any Australian show. She coached the horse and rider which established a record of 7 foot for the high jump at the Mount Cravat show yesterday. The rider is her 23-year-old ex-Royal Navy son-in-law, Charlie Knights. 3 years ago, Charlie had never been on a horse's back. Miss Kemp is a familiar figure in show arenas and says she will again enter in the Brisbane exhibition this year. Twice widowed and the mother of 3 children, she has been riding since she was orphaned at the age of 12. She now conducts a riding school at Peru and follows the round of shows. She says she's competed in every show ring in Australia. She won't retire and says firmly she would die if she gave up horse riding. Mary died in 1975 at the age of 94. Her death certificate states that she was born in Brisbane and had married Patrick Daly in Queensland. It didn't have a date. And then married Job Stone in 1921 in Queensland. Interestingly, her death certificate states she had no children. A person that was not a relation was the informant on this death certificate. In a bonus episode, I'll be covering John Daly's family, his parents, but also his siblings. And you will notice that there is quite a bit of a similarity to do with some of the siblings' temperaments and also their interests. This will be bonus episode number 46. I will upload that episode at the same time that this episode is published.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.